When you talk about the plight of Long Island schools, there's probably no school system in worse financial shape than the Roosevelt District. In Part 4 of our Focus 12 report, A Costly Lesson, education editor Roma Torre is here with a look at the ailing district and its efforts to stay alive. Roma.
Thanks, Ellen. Eddie Murphy was enrolled there, and so was basketball great Dr. J. But the Roosevelt school system isn't known for its celebrity alumni. The school district is very poor, and that translates into poor performance. In fact, today the state issued its list of schools needing improvement in test scores, and Roosevelt was among them. More than half the students there are failing their Regents tests in math and writing. But school officials insist their problems all stem from lack of funds, and they point out the state is quick to hand out criticism, but it does very little to offer desperately needed aid.
We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
But what about the students? In 1986, the Great Neck School District spent $12,000 on each of its students. The Roosevelt School District could only afford $6,000 a student.
Do they all have the opportunity to make the same choices? I rather doubt it.
The sad fact is the Roosevelt School District is the poorest on Long Island.
We do not have large industry. We do not have large commerce in Roosevelt. Therefore, the amount of money received from the property owners is much less than in our neighboring communities.
It's frustrating. Sometimes I go home and I just sit there. And sometimes I even ask God to help me to find out what we should do next, perhaps.
Frances Goodson is president of the Roosevelt School Board. She says the inequities don't stop with the tax structure. She complains the proposed state aid for Roosevelt schools next year is intolerably low, barely a 1% increase from this year's allocation.
Over the 10 years that I've served on the Board of Education, we have never gotten such a small amount of operating aid, whereas Great Neck stands to get 6% increase. That's an inequity.
But there is some hope on the horizon. Pending in Albany is a bill to establish an equalization rate for the Roosevelt School District. If that passes, it would mean additional funds of about $1 million for the schools. That may not sound like a lot of money, but for a school system that runs on $20 million a year, $1 million is seen as a blessing. If they do get the money, one of the first areas earmarked for spending is the teaching staff.
We would like to see Roosevelt get better teachers, maintain those teachers, keep those teachers.
The teachers in Roosevelt are still lagging $4,000 to $5,000 behind our neighboring school districts. After they get a year or 2 years of experience, they go to other school districts.
But teachers have their own spending priorities.
We need more books, we need more, oh my goodness, I can go on with the field trips. I also must admit that we are making do with what we have.
Despite inadequate funds, it's that optimism that keeps the district going, and success stories can't help but become inspirational.
Once I graduate high school, I'm immediately going to the Navy, and they're going to send me to college on a scholarship for 4 years. And I come back and be a naval officer, hopefully nuclear physics.
In any school, students like William Malone are the exception. For the rest, Roosevelt school officials are doing their best to keep grades, if not spirits, high, and they're striving to be competitive with state-of-the-art equipment, from computers and word processors to advanced engineering tools and machines.
My classes I don't have any trouble with, we have everything we need.
Of course, the problems are there. Test scores are low, and only about half the graduating seniors go on to college. But Roosevelt schools are managing to survive in the face of tremendous odds. The question is, how long can that continue?
We will not be able to afford a school district if this continues, because the surrounding school districts are pirating our teachers, and our children are falling through the cracks.
There's obviously a lot hinging on that equalization rate bill. Last year, it passed both houses in the state, but Governor Cuomo vetoed it. This year, the deadline is June 30th, And if it doesn't make it this time, school officials say they'll have to take some kind of desperate action. That's a real shame because this is one school that deserves A's for effort. By the way, the 3 other schools listed by the state for poor performance are Hempstead High, Wyandanch High, and Hempstead Middle School.
All week long, we've been hearing complaints from school officials that the money they receive from taxes and state aid isn't reaching the students. So just where is the money going? Our Focus 12 series, A Costly Lesson, concludes with a report by education editor Roma Torre.
Hopefully I can give you some answers. Thanks, Alan. The governor has also been complaining that students aren't getting the money, but while Mario Cuomo blames the schools for squandering the money, the schools blame Cuomo. They complain the state has imposed too many regulations on the schools, and when it comes time to making up the new budgets, the schools are finding most of their funds are already committed to expenses mandated by the state. It's a catch-22. The Patchogue-Medford schools, for example, budget is going up 10%, not to fund a daycare program or a special class for gifted students. It's to pay for things such as health insurance.
In this state, we spend more per pupil on elementary and secondary education than any state in the nation. Now, we have been generous. There's no question about that. I think what we need now is to be more accountable.
The governor has a point. In the past 5 years, state aid to education has increased by 50%. And yet, what do the schools have to show for it? If the measure is an improvement in test scores, then schools on the average aren't doing very well at all. Test scores have barely improved. But education experts will argue that's an unfair measurement.
Aid to education dollars is a misnomer, because the aid to education that is presently situated is the fact that much of it, too much of it, in fact, has to go to areas that are outside of education.
The social and economic changes that have come in the last 10 and 20 years are extraordinary, and we have to address that. We keep asking for the money. We keep fighting for the money. At the same time, these costs that are out of our control are going higher and higher and higher.
The common solution is to raise taxes, but local business leaders frown on that idea, saying the economy just can't bear it.
And after a while, they will defeat themselves and there'll be no one left to tax.
The superintendent of Patchogue-Medford schools is looking at a proposed budget of $70 million for next year. But he complains much of his district's money is tangled up in a web of regulations and bureaucracy. Out of that $70 million budget, $31 million will pay teachers' salaries. The largest single increase can be blamed on health insurance.
We are, as many other school districts are, members of the Empire State Health Insurance Program. As it's turned out, a $2 million premium has become nearly $4 million in 1 year. The consequences of that have been devastating.
And then there are the operational and maintenance expenses. Windows, for example. The cost to replace windows in this elementary school was originally estimated at $180,000. That cost goes up $90,000 because of a state regulation requiring laboratory tests for asbestos.
We can look at this building and we know that it contains brick and mortar, and there are no asbestos in that material. However, my word on that is not good enough. I have to bring in an independent laboratory to test that material to certify that it is free of any asbestos, and that is the cost.
Add to that $300,000 for the mandated replacement of oil tanks, which Reed says didn't need replacing, and the cost of garbage removal.
As crazy as this may sound, next year we will spend $180,000 to remove trash from the district and $120,000 for the district's reading program. Certainly, that is out of all perspective.
And when the tallying is complete and the mandates are spent, what's left for education expenses? $3.5 million. Barely 5% of the budget is going to the students.
Gifted children suffer. Children who are considered average in their school programs suffer because they don't get the extra programs, they don't get the individual attention that's necessary to make their lives different.
Going to school these days is no longer just a simple matter of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Schools have become social agencies dealing with students' individual problems and needs, from alcohol and drug abuse to daycare. All of that costs money, lots of it. And given the unique problems within schools and school districts, educators are demanding more freedom to spend their money. What's the point of aid to education, they say, if it's not benefiting the children?
When you sit down to look at a budget, I think it's important for people to look at that budget and realize this is the children, this is our future.
Well, now, just to set the record straight, unlike the rest of New York, the majority of Long Island schools are showing marked improvement in their test scores. That's just another reason why Long Island school districts are demanding that the system be changed. The problems of urban schools aren't necessarily the same on Long Island. A lot of money is being spent on what school officials will tell you are wasteful expenses. So hopefully we can all learn from this, because it certainly has been one very costly lesson. Lee, Alan?
Thank you, Roma.
You're welcome.